I had quite a few requests to restore this vise when I mentioned it in a recent video. It hasn't been looked after, it's a bit beat up, covered in weld spatter and just generally a bit tired. It's not the highest quality vise, but still decent, and it didn't cost me anything. I bought a workbench and the guy couldn't get the vise off, so he threw the vise in with the workbench. The first thing to do is release the compression in the spring, and then I can pull the vise apart. There's a pin in there holding the spring in, and I just need to remove the grease so I can get to it. It's a bit over the top, but I've been looking for an excuse to try this awesome clamp out. New World sent me a bunch of them to try out. They're high quality and incredibly solid. They're 100% steel and made to last. If you're looking to buy some awesome clamps and you're in Australia, you can get a 15% discount with the code Pask Makes, and I'll put a link in the description. That's all the parts stripped down. I'll start degreasing them, and I'm using Terps. It may not be the best thing, but I have plenty of it and it'll work well enough. That's got most of the grease and gunk off, and now I'll start stripping the paint off. There's 3 different layers. There's the blue top coat, and then below that is a layer of filler, and on the bottom there's a red primer. Most of it's coming off pretty easily. There's a few areas of red primer stuck in the casting, but they won't be an issue and can stay there. Now I can do something about all that weld spatter on the front jaw. Now I'm cleaning up the slides. The edges and the corners just need tidying up as they've got a few dents and nicks along them, and this will help them glide more easily. Next, I'll remove any rust, and I'll do that by soaking it in Evaporust. I didn't have enough to cover the whole vise, so I kept turning it over every now and then. When it finished working its magic, I rinsed it off in water to neutralise it. Any red left on there is the red primer deep in the casting and not rust. The evaporous can go back in the bottle and be used again next time. The underneath of the vise isn't very flat, so I'm grinding it where needed to stop it from rocking. I didn't clean up the slides earlier on the main body of the vise, so I'll do that now. The anvil also needs cleaning up a little too. I'm not going to go too far with any of this, I'm just trying to freshen it up a bit. I just noticed weld spatter on the back too, so I'll clean that up next. Before I paint it, I'll give it a really good clean down with methylated spirits. The castings aren't the best and there's a few imperfections that need filling before I can paint it. I'm using hammer finish and I ended up putting something like 5 or 6 coats on. Even with all those coats of paint, it didn't build the finish as well as I'd hoped, so I decided to add more filler and repaint it. I reckon that looks much better now. Next I'll start working on the handle, which was chromed and most of that is missing. I'll sand it back the best I can and then blacken it. Before I blacken it, I'll clean it down with acetone, and for the blackening I'm using super glue. After it's turned black, it needs rinsing with water, and when it's dry, I'll add oil. It's not perfect, but it will stop it from rusting. I'm really not happy with the jaws. They look gnarly and filled with weld spatter, and one of them has been cracked before and welded back together. I'll make new ones from mild steel. This 12mm thick flat bar is the thickest steel I have, and it's the perfect thickness for the jaws. I'm still loving this saw. It amazes me every time I use it, and it's cutting through 12mm thick steel like it was wood. I cut them a bit wider than they needed to be, so I'll grind them back a bit and then I'll machine them on my new milling machine. If I didn't have that, I would have just managed with a belt grinder, and then if I didn't have that, I would have just managed with a file. Apart from a couple of small tests, this is the very first time I've used the milling machine. I'll start by flattening one of the edges, and I'm sure I'm doing plenty of things wrong, but I'm having fun and I'm learning something new. When I bought the milling machine, I had absolutely no idea how to use it. So to learn, I've been watching Blondie Hacks. If you haven't seen her channel, it's entertaining and informative. And I've been watching the Mill Skill series, and that's what's got me up and running. If you're interested in learning more, then I definitely recommend checking out her channel. I know that next I'm supposed to machine an adjacent face to make a 90-degree corner, just the same as milling wood, but for what I need here, I reckon it will be accurate enough to flip it over and mill the opposite edge now. I reckon they look pretty good, so now I'll drill some holes. When I squared up the ends on the mill, I took too much off and they've ended up being a touch too short on the one end. I've milled two more off camera and I'm drilling them with plenty left either end this time, and then I'll cut these down afterwards. Before I cut the jaws to length, I'll assemble the vise first. I'm leaving a little overhang on the jaws, just a couple of millimeters, and then I'll trim them down to length on the bandsaw. I'll finish the ends up this time on the belt grinder. The screws aren't the best and the threads are a bit worn, but they work. I'll probably get some new ones, but I'll just reuse these for now. I'll mount the vise on the end of my milling machine stand, and there's plenty of room there for the milling machine to move freely. One of the bolts I'm using isn't quite long enough to put washers on, so I will replace that, but I'll manage with it for now. I reckon that turned out great and it should be good for a few more years. I really enjoyed myself. It was a fun project. Hopefully you enjoyed it too. If you did, please like and subscribe. Thanks for watching and I'll see you on the next one.